Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Tuesday, April 8th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. For many elections, Latinos were a predictable bloc of Democratic voters, but not in 2024. More than 40% of Latinos went for Trump.
It's okay to finally understand what it means to not be a monolith and what it means for a Democratic Party to not take this extremely complex community for granted.
We explore the shifting political leanings of the Latino population later in the show, but first, these news headlines. Health officials in the eastern Sierra Nevada are alarmed over recent deaths due to hantavirus. That's a disease that's commonly transmitted by rodents. KVPR's Crescencio Rodriguez Delgado reports on the investigation.
Hantavirus has killed 3 people in the community of Mammoth Lakes. The latest death was announced just last week. Health officials say all 3 people became ill in February. But the deaths are puzzling health department officials in Mono County. That's because infection commonly occurs after exposure to mouse droppings. The virus also typically occurs in late spring or summer, not this early in the year. There is possible clues in one of the deaths. One person had recently vacuumed an area with mouse droppings, and that may have caused the feces to contaminate the air. The virus also reached the news lately as the cause of death of Betsy Arakawa. The pianist was found dead alongside her husband, actor Gene Hackman, earlier this year at their home in New Mexico. For KVPR News, I'm Crescencio Rodriguez Delgado.
The tumbling stock market could take a significant bite out of California's state budget next year. Alexei Kosov with our California newsroom partner Cal Matters explains why.
A big chunk of California's state budget depends on the wealthiest taxpayers. About 40% of all income tax revenue comes from the top 1% of earners, and those taxpayers make a lot of their money in the stock market. So when the market dips, as it has since President Trump added a sweeping new round of tariffs last week, so do income tax revenues that fund California's budget. Governor Gavin Newsom's Department of Finance is already modeling how this could affect his upcoming spending plan, at a time when the state is already losing crucial federal funding. Spokesperson H.D. Palmer told me that they will finalize an economic forecast by the end of the month. Many of those scenarios would require spending cuts for state programs, but Palmer would not confirm what might be on the chopping block.
That was Cal Matters reporter Alexei Kosov. The Senate Education Committee has passed legislation intended to stop kids from experiencing sexual harassment. The bill requires California schools to focus on Title IX safety during designated weeks. Rohan Michael Haban testified in support of the measure.
At the age of 13, in 7th grade, I myself was a victim of sexual harassment. It has been 4 years since that incident, and for 4 years, I have been thinking about how I experienced a lack of support and a place to turn to. SB 334 is a necessary step towards ensuring that students are informed of their rights and protected from sexual harassment in schools.
The bill heads next to the Judiciary Committee. Title IX is a federal law protecting people from discrimination based on sex in education programs or activities that receive federal financial assistance. Several California universities are reporting visa cancellations for their students, according to the LA Times. This comes as the Trump administration cracks down on student visa holders across the country. At least 45 current or former students at several California campuses have had their visas revoked in recent days, according to the Times. Campus officials tell the newspaper that the visa cancellations appear to be violations of the visa terms.
You're driving through the neighborhood one day, and there, in your neighbor's driveway, sits a metal mess of spider webs the likes of which you've never seen. It's a KVPR car. Tell your neighbors, your family, and your friends if they've got a car they no longer need, donate it. KVPR can turn that unwanted car into great radio. It's a super easy and totally free process. Visit kvpr.org/cars to learn more.
And now to our main story. Latinos are the fastest growing demographic in the U.S., and among the many surprising revelations of the 2024 elections was their support for President Trump. Voter surveys reveal Trump won more than 40% of the Latino vote, and he performed especially well among Latino men. That's despite his anti-immigrant rhetoric and call for mass deportations, which has hit the Latino community particularly hard. Author and journalist Paola Ramos has been looking into this. She highlights extreme cases of far-right Latinos in her recently published book titled Defectors: The Rise of the Latino Far Right and What It Means for America. Paola's book explores this group's changing sensibilities and why some Latinos are leaning so far right politically for causes that could be detrimental to themselves. Paola is giving a lecture tonight at CSU Bakersfield. We caught up with her beforehand. She starts by explaining why she chose the title Defectors.
So, of course, the idea of defecting, no, it's this idea of abandoning a presumed loyalty to someone, something, an entity. And so I think the story has always been about Latinos and immigrants, that we were supposed to be loyal to not only a Democratic Party, but also like a set of ideals around what this country was supposed to be, right? A country where we were all supposed to be achieving more liberties and rights and freedoms and more dignity. And so I think Defectors is sort of like a play of words of, so what happens, no? If we kind of take away this assumption about Latinos, this assumption that Latinos were supposed to be loyal to that story of us. If we do that, then you start to see a Latino community that's a lot more complex, that also has a historic tendency to alienate itself with the Republican Party, and now obviously with Trumpism. So it's a little bit of kind of like just making us like rethink of this very basic idea of like, who are we supposed to be loyal to?
Yeah, so much to unpack there. For listeners who haven't read the book, what would you say is the main point that you're trying to get across that was important to you, important enough to sit down and write this book?
I mean, let's look at where we are today, right? Let's think about the fact that the president of the United States, who is now unleashing mass deportations, who won on that promise, who is now defying the courts to pursue that promise, that someone like him, according to exit polls, was able to get 45% of the Latino vote, was able to win the Latino male vote. And not only that, but was also able to make extreme and like significant inroads in heavy immigrant counties, right? Like there are direct correlations between his gains and the amount of immigrants in specific counties. And so I think the idea of the book is really to get us to understand the why, no? Mm-hmm. There's an easy why, right? There's like this sort of like superficial answer that perhaps it was the economy, perhaps it was simply just like the Trump effect, the fear mongering. But I think what I try and argue in the book is that maybe it's something a little bit deeper and more uncomfortable, no? And it is this idea that we carry a lot of history and culture from Latin America, a lot of racial baggage, a significant amount of weight of colonialism, a lot of political traumas, and none of that, I think, manifests neatly in American politics. And I think Trumpism, as we're seeing, was able to tap into some aspects of that. And so I think the why, it's what we're seeing now, no? Like, how was it that so many Latinos were able to support Donald Trump?
Data shows that the U.S. is becoming increasingly Latino, and I'm curious if you think we're going to see a more complex Latino identity reveal itself as years go on.
I mean, I think that's the biggest question, no? I mean, that's what I think about all the time. Like today, what holds us together, no? Like, is there such a thing as one Latino community and one Latino voice? I think for so many years, like it made sense, right? Because we were all sort of tied to this like origin immigrant story. And I think for many, many decades, I think that like tied us all together, no? That we were bound by this like very like familiar, like collective experience that someone in our families had gone through. We felt like minorities. Now, obviously, we've assimilated, we've Americanized. But I'm waiting to answer that question because I'm really curious to see how the community reacts as we're starting to really face these images of ICE raids and deportations and people being wrongly deported and, taken to El Salvador. And so I don't know if in a moment like this, there's sort of this like collective reawakening where people are like, wait a second, like he also was actually trying to target me, no? I am Latino, I'm a US citizen, but wait a second, they're actually racially profiling me as well. And so I don't know truly the answer to that question. I don't know if 4 years from now we actually like reemerge from this and like we find a unity again. And I think that's kind of that's the whole point of this, that there's a big question mark, and it's okay, no? It's okay to finally understand what it means to not be a monolith and what it means for a Democratic Party to not take this extremely complex community for granted.
Now, Paola, you released this book in September of last year, and I'm curious, since a lot has changed politically since then, with Trump now back in the White House and him following through with his promises of deportations, which we discussed. If you could, would you add anything to your book, or maybe perhaps change how you address a particular topic? What have sort of been your thoughts since publication and all that's happened?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I would add states, right? Like I wish I would have had like more time to explore Arizona. I think it's such a like interesting battleground state. And I think that state carries like just so much story around what happens at the national level. I think I would have spent more time digging into the sort of fascination with Trump's like strongman appeal. I touch a little bit on the book, but not enough. And I think right now we're starting to see these like really interesting links between Trump and Bukele. And I'm really curious to see how Latinos, many of whom flee from a lot of these like authoritarian regimes, I would have loved to like have a better understanding around the psychology behind it all, no? Like how allergic or not, or fascinated or attracted or not we are to this like strongman rule. So I get a little bit into the book, but I think not enough. And I think now we're at this like really interesting intersection where like all of this is happening.
Anything else you'd like to add, Paola?
No, I mean, look, the only thing would be just to the point of this book is to really grasp with the idea that like, as opposed to what we were told for many years, like working in politics and in like mainstream media, like Latinos are extremely complex human beings. And this really isn't around like voting for Trump or voting for Biden or Harris. This is really around understanding like what makes us really complex. And I think if we're able to understand that, which is conversations about racism and authoritarianism and traumas, like if we're able to do that work, I think we're able to learn a lot about who we are. And I think that'll have like big political implications. So that would be my last message.
Paola Ramos, author of Defectors, The Rise of the Latino Far Right and What It Means for America. Thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you. I really appreciate you.
Paola will be hosting a lecture tonight at CSU Bakersfield. Her talk will begin at 6 p.m. in the Dore Theater. The event is free and open to the public. And that is today's show. Do you have feedback on today's show or a story idea? We would love to hear from you. Just email podcast@kvpr.org. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
This is Tanya Mosley, co-host of Fresh Air. You'll see your favorite actors, directors, and comedians on late-night TV shows or YouTube. But what you get with Fresh Air is a deep dive. Spend some quality time with people like Billie Eilish, Questlove, Ariana Grande, Stephen Colbert, and so many more. We ask questions you won't hear asked anywhere else. Listen to the Fresh Air podcast from NPR and WHYY.